Today on the podcast, a trip to a Parisian bookshop, a debut novel, and of course the weekly reveal to what magical book I have pulled down from my to-be-read shelf. All of that and more this week on a novel review. Hello and welcome to the Literature Podcast, a novel review. My name is Seamus, your host, and together we will discuss, dissect, and explore the wonderful world of literature, and the wonderful world of literature is a vast and dense jungle, so let's start making our way through, one book at a time. Hey guys, how are we doing? Another week, I am back with another book, just like always. Today I'm going to be exploring the debut novel, Zulaikha by Niloufar-Lily Soltani, and it's a wonderful book in that, but we can't get there just yet. We always take a moment to reflect on any mantelpiece moments, and if anyone tuned into last week's episode, you would know that I recently went to Paris, and because Paris is such a wonderful city, I did quite a few different things that I didn't want to squeeze my inner shelf moment into just one thing, so I've split it up. And yeah, so Paris trip part 2. This time I went to Shakespeare and Company, the bookshop. Very, very good bookshop at that. I'm sure many of us have heard of it or read about it, perhaps in this book, A Moveable Feast by Hemmingway. Bought this because my girlfriend's never read it and I wanted her to read it. And I also wanted an excuse to reread it again myself. So we've just sort of launched in. I bought a few books and I was going to take you through it. The bookshop itself is really cool. If you've never been there, it's changed a lot. And I guess that's probably more a result of COVID than anything else. You have to line up now to get in. There's security on the door. So it's sort of like a one in, one out situation. But I guess what's really good and a bit sad as well, because you do want to take a picture in there, but what's really good is they don't allow photography in there, and it's really good for the sense that the bookshop is not just filled with people looking to get a shot in the famous Shakespeare and Company and put it on their social media and move on without actually buying a book. So when you do enter the shop, it's actually just nice to be surrounded by people that are just there looking to buy books. But I say it's sad because it's a beautiful, beautiful bookshop, and like a picture would be cool as well, but I'd rather take the former with no pictures. So yeah, Moveable Feast, first one. Second book I bought just mostly because of the cover, because I think it's going to go down as probably one of the great shots of Paris. It's Notre burning and then Eiffel Tower in the background, you know, great thickets of smoke bellowing out of the spire as it just sort of starts to collapse on that fateful day in, September 2019. And this is basically just a little history of Notre Dame, which I've sort of been very interested to read a bit more about ever since I did the episode on the Hunchback of Notre Dame, which was a book I then bought as well, because I don't actually have a copy of this. I listened to that book and then I saw this wonderful cover, and it's a book that was made just for Shakespeare and Company. The cover was just made for Shakespeare and Company Paris. So I thought that was kind of cool just to buy as kind of like a memento. I also kind of love the cover because it's sort of this wonderful sketched cover, but it's Paris as Paris is today. There's cars on the road and people and stuff. So it feels very modern in that sense. And I mean, if you look really closely, you can even see Shakespeare and Company. But then it's still got a little person on the roof of Notre Dame, implying that perhaps the Hunchback is still there haunting the place to this day. So was really happy to get that because, yeah, I did an episode on it. I have no idea what number episode that was, maybe 40 something. And I was just keen to sort of have my own copy of that. So I bought that. And it seemed the right time and place to do it. Paris, 1874, ABC of Impressionism. I actually didn't buy this. This is just snuck into the pile. I bought this at an art gallery. This was the catalogue. So that snuck in very cheaply. And then I was sort of hoping to buy a nice sort of Hemmingway, really nice sort of hardcover, A Farewell to Arms. I've never read this one, and beautiful hardcover edition. Again, just sort of feels like the right time to buy something like a Hemingway when you're in a place like that, which, you know, heavily inspired him and he lived in. So was kind of saving up to purposefully buy a book like this while in Paris. And if you've ever been to Shakespeare and Company, you'd know, but you do get a wonderful stamp in the front, Shakespeare and Company, kilometer 0 to Paris, implying that you, of course, bought this at ground zero, which is Shakespeare and Company in Paris. So all the books have the stamp in them, but yeah, very happy with my haul. It's kind of one of those things that like now that you have to line up, you're kind of in there and you sort of take a bit longer to decide because, once you step out, it's, another half an hour wait to get in or whatever, however big the line is. So there's a lot of pressure to sort of choose your books carefully, but I'm very happy with my pile. And that was, I guess, my haul. We're doing haul videos now, so I love that. Yeah. Housekeeping, as always, if you would like to like and subscribe, please feel free to do so. I would love that. I would really appreciate that. So yeah, like and subscribe. A couple of 5-star reviews never go astray as well. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Okay, let's jump into this book. Zulaikha. Wonderful little book. It's actually, I should sort of get straight. It's a debut novel. I should start with that actually. I was going to jump straight into an overview, which I will do now. I'm not even going to attempt to do my own overview of the story because it is essentially just about this woman, Zulaikha, and her life, which I guess in a sense is kind of random to do a overview of, not in the sense that the story doesn't make sense, but because lives are essentially random and we don't know what's coming next. It's not a contained story. It's actually just like sort of a snippet of her life. So it's kind of random in that sense. And I sort of grappled with coming up with my own overview. And then I just thought, why, when I can just sort of paraphrase the blurb? Someone has been paid to do this for me. Thank you. So here we go. In the winter of 2007, returning home from visiting her son in Amsterdam, Zulaikha accidentally runs into Kia, a family friend she hasn't seen for many years. Kia's father has passed away and he is flying home to attend his funeral. In a shocking twist, Zulaikha suspects that Kia may have had information about Zulaikha's missing brother Hessam, who disappeared shortly following the murder of their mutual friend Abbas during the Iran-Iraq War. I'll stop it there. That's only one paragraph of the blurb, but I think that's sort of a really great place to stop and start talking about the story because that all happens in sort of the first chapter and then you go back in time. I think it's 40 years. And so you get all these characters that are much younger, childhood age, which I think is really interesting because you sort of know exactly where they end up. You know that Key is sort of an estranged friend now that she hasn't seen in many years. Hessam's gone missing and Zulaikha has a son that's living in Amsterdam. And so you're kind of like, okay, how do we now get there? And that's what the story is essentially about. So let's start at the beginning of this book because I really loved the beginning of the book because I felt a lot of similarities with the character, which might sound a bit odd, but let me explain. So Zulaikha is at Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam and she is taken away for questioning for sort of no apparent reason. And she's a bit confused as to why she's being taken away. And it I guess it's sort of meant to be a tension-building scene, but for me, it did not build any tension through no fault of Lily, the writer, at all, because back when I was doing my master's, I was fortunate enough to go to Israel to study. And when I was looking at flights to go from Australia to Israel, they were pretty much the same price as going Australia, Europe, Israel. So naturally, I was 25, I think, maybe 26. I decided to go via Europe for a week because why not? And I've got some family in Amsterdam. And so I stayed with them and had a great week. Went to Van Gogh Museum, the Rijksmuseum, did a few other things as well. And then I got to the airport, Schiphol Airport, same airport, and, was trying to get a boarding pass. And they kind of, looked me up and down. They say, wait, you've been in Europe for a week. You're Australian. You're young. You're traveling alone. You don't know anyone in Israel. You don't know you're basically looking suspect at this stage. You have been to Morocco in a previous trip. You've been to Indonesia in a previous trip. You don't know anyone in Israel really. What's going on? And so they questioned me for a while and I sort of gave them what I thought were all the right answers. I explained the situation like I just have here. Tried to show them pictures on my phone of the Van Gogh Museum, the Rijksmuseum, walking through Vondel Park, stuff like that, doing pretty normal things. Didn't believe me at all. Taken away for questioning, strip searched, everything in my bag's gone through. Big reader, so I had quite a few books and I had some textbooks as well. They went through literally every single page, like they were flicking through every single page to see what I was hiding, asking me who I was meeting, what packages I had, if I had packages, had anyone given me packages, where I was going. And it's like they just kept asking the questions over and over, obviously trying to get me to slip up if I was lying, which I wasn't. And it was, I thought, kind of fascinating, because then after, it must have been an hour and a half, they let me out, escorted me to the desk to get my boarding pass, which I thought was just a courtesy thing, which turned out not to be, because then they escorted me to my gate, told me to stay here and not leave. And then I thought I was alone and free. And then I boarded the plane, and then they came on and checked that I was sitting in the seat that I was sitting in. So they took it very, very seriously. And so I kind of felt really connected to Zulaikha at the start, because essentially the same thing happens to her. And I just found that really sort of interesting. And I was sort of reading it going, oh my God, this is just my life. Like I know exactly what's happening here. So I found it really interesting at that stage. And then we sort of jump back in time, and the story sort of really kicks off, and I had no similarities with the character like that, because it was quite a dark, dark story. So I guess that's where the fun ended for me, at least, because then it became a really serious story about, the Iraq-Iran war and everything like this. But that first part was really, really fun for me. So now I just want to praise Lily's sort of writing, her attention to detail in the writing. This was something I noticed quite early on in the story. She has a real attention to detail in her writing and a real grasp of the story itself. So one of the sort of earlier scenes in the story when Zulaikha is younger is she gets not sold, married off to a sheik. She becomes the second wife of a sheik. And from memory, she's quite young. She must have been like 15, 16 at the time. So she's incredibly young, incredibly vulnerable, kind of unsure of what's going on herself. And it's this really emotionally charged part of the book, I felt, because it's when you're still with a character that is quite young and innocent. And the sheik was called Sheikh Ahmed. And what I noticed was that when speaking about Ahmed, he was always just called Ahmed. Whenever they're talking about him in any kind of situation, it was just Ahmed this, Ahmed that. And then as soon as it became a situation where Ahmed was taking Zulaikha to bed or something like this, something where he's sort of exercising his power as, his, in quotations, right, he suddenly became Sheikh Ahmed. And so even though it's an incredibly subtle change in the story and the text, it sort of implies subconsciously, consciously in the reader's mind that suddenly, no, this is Sheikh Ahmed now. This is a guy assuming his power, and what's considered his right is to take his wife to bed, even though it's essentially a child. And it's sort of those small little attentions to detail, those small moments of attention that I really appreciate and really loved in this book, because there's others as well, but that was sort of the first one I picked up on. And it just sort of shows a really nice control that Lily has over the text, and she understands what she's trying to do and portray and convey in her writing style. What I found interesting about this book was it takes place during sort of a 40-year period, but sort of the main tension of the book is this Iran-Iraq war, which before the book I didn't actually know that much about. And I'd say, to be honest, I still don't know that much about, because even though it takes place during, the story of this book takes place during a very serious time period of political upheaval, I felt the book didn't go into that much detail about that particular conflict itself. And I'm kind of in two minds. I don't know if I would have liked more or liked it as it is, liked it how it currently is more. Mainly because, one, I love history, and so I sort of love to learn different things of history. And I think one of the wonderful things about coming to books like this, which do explore sort of lives through these periods, are getting that detail of what their lives were like, which you still get, but the background information. But then on the other hand, I'm also like, because I know so little about the war, maybe learning information would have just confused me in a way that detracted me from the story itself. And I think therefore leaving the war out was a really interesting, she doesn't leave the war out, I shouldn't say that, it's still very much there, but leaving out a lot more detail than you could add in for a story like this. I don't know if that sort of enhanced my reading, but what it did do is it actually gave me a very different reading, because it's similar, the book I did, I was going to say a few weeks ago, many weeks ago now, The Island of Missing Trees, that was a story that sort of was about the Turkish and the Greeks take on Cyprus. And I think she balanced the text really well in that you didn't feel connected to either side. And I think Lily does this really well as well, in that I don't even know if I knew which side was the good side, technically the good side, and which side was technically the bad side, because I didn't know that much about the war, and I don't think she went into the war that much. That sort of gave me that sort of intention. So what it did for me was it really actually humanized the characters, and you sort of read this story going through the lives of these people through this war, and you don't know, at least I didn't know, what side they were on and what that actually meant in the sort of larger political sphere of the world. And so you get a much more humanistic read of the text, which I think is incredibly important, because when you pick a side, there's, I think I quoted it in a previous episode, a decision for something is a decision against something else. And so taking a side in this, in conflicts, while often is necessary, it is a decision against something, and there are going to be innocent people on the other side. So I really liked not having to, I guess, make a choice myself, and I got to actually just to enjoy these people as human beings on a whole. And I think that's something that can be lost in war stories, is sort of the humanity of it all, because it is humans in these stories, and they're the ones I really want to know about. I mean, war is interesting as a topic to explore and write about, and we're clearly fascinated by war as a human race because we do it so damn often. But I think just being able to sort of focus on the characters through this period really enhances your read and gives you an honest read of what these people were feeling during this time and what it was like as humans living through these conflicts. Now that I've sort of said all that, that's not to say that there isn't tension absolutely created from the war, because there is some serious tension that sort of comes from this. I mean, the opening chapter itself, I think, is meant to sort of lay this foundation of tension about sort of lawful evil, if you will, which of course just completely swept over my head for the reasons I specified before, from having the complete similarities to the situation. But this lawful evil idea comes back through the story as well, and I think that's where I am most frightened in stories like this, is the, I say it again in quotations, the lawful evil, because it's kind of just the evil in charge, but they sort of have the law on their side, and they've created their own law in this sense. And in one scene, Zulaikha is taken away and put in prison, and it's, I guess, a frightening scene, because there's that wonderful quote in True Detective Season 1, Rustin Cole, I'll paraphrase it, but he says something like, "Of course you should be scared of me, I'm the police. I can do things to people with impunity." And it's this really frightening idea that you feel completely powerless in these situations. And especially as the reader, you've just watched Zulaikha be swept away and put in prison, even though you know she's completely innocent in whatever they're after. And no matter how much, well, I guess it's kind of like the situation, at the start, when I was getting questioned by the people in Amsterdam, it's like, no matter how much I told them that I was just there on a holiday visiting museums and galleries and buying books, they didn't believe me. And it's really only until you've thoroughly proved it that they sort of have to concede the fact that maybe they were wrong. I'm not saying that they were necessarily wrong in that situation, because obviously they're trying to weed out terrorists, and I'm pretty much completely fine with that and everything. But it's that moment of, you are completely powerless in a situation. And I think that tension was really strong in this book, because you feel really frightened. And even though Zulaikha ends up at the end of the story with a son, and he's in Amsterdam and she seems relatively fine, you're still really frightened, because she obviously gets out of this jail, but you then know anyone at any moment in this story can just sort of be picked off and thrown in jail without any kind of crime being committed. And it's that kind of frightening tension that permeates the part of the story that I think is really deeply affecting, and sort of really hits home what these situations are like. But what I really loved about this story is, well, there's two sort of things I really loved about the story. Is one, I love getting sort of a nearly cradle to grave. I do love a cradle to grave book, but this is nearly cradle to grave. It's 40, 50 year time period, so not quite cradle to grave, but a very long period of time. And I love watching characters grow and develop, and I loved spending time with Zulaikha. Obviously at the start, she's incredibly young and perhaps naive and innocent and stuff like this, and she's kind of molded by her situations, and she has to grow up in different ways and adapt to different things. And it's understanding, I guess it's what I love about them, is seeing how characters can develop and lead different lives in different periods of their own lives. And everyone sort of thinks they're condemned to live one life, but that one life can take on many different identities, I guess. But what I loved is Zulaikha has such an intense, at least I felt it, that it was a really intense love for her homeland. And I always love that idea that you're in love with your homeland, that no matter how blasted by bombs it can get, or how ravaged it can get by soldiers or terrorists or whatever coming through and completely destroying it, the land is still inherently innocent in its existence. And, you know, you can say it's a terrible place, but at the end of the day, it's not a terrible place. It's the people inhabiting it that make it terrible. And so she kind of has this love for the land. And, you know, I get the sense that if she goes back, she thinks she can start to act in a way that recreates the love for this land, and hopefully other people will then start to respect the land in this kind of way. And that's something I really love about these kind of stories, is no matter how bombed and terrorized they get, there's always people that are just devoutly in love with them and want nothing but the best, and, you know, want these areas to thrive in the best kind of way. And she was a character I really, really enjoyed spending time with. So that is Zulaikha. What would I rate this? I mean, it's a debut novel, so absolutely fantastic. I'm going to give it a 4.1 out of 5. So what am I reading this week? This week I am reading nothing, but I'm about to read this because I picked it up the other day. It's called Leaf by Niggle by J.R.R. Tolkien, and it's about sort of this painter that always seems a bit too busy to do his art. And I sort of finished a couple books, had nothing to read, have read a lot of big books recently. This is a very short story. I think it's 40 pages. The day has just turned a lovely grey for summertime in London. So yeah, I think gonna park up on the couch and give this a little read. I was hoping to do it in the park, but alas, here we are. If you have listened this far, please consider hitting those 5 stars. I would really appreciate it. Also, feel free to head along to the website and support the pod. But as always, just thank you for your attention. So I think it's time to end this episode. And Zulaikha, another wonderful thing about it is that Lily Soltani, the author, obviously has this intense love for poetry. And throughout the book, there's all these wonderful Middle Eastern poets. And yeah, this one, I really love this one. It's by Sohrab Seferi. So I think I might read it to take out this episode. And it goes, in an empty, ventless room, a reflection was floating and I fell asleep in the dark. In the deep end of my sleep, I found myself, and this awakening interrupted the serenity of my sleep. Was this awakening my new mistake?